Hey everyone! Today, we're talking about an important battle from the Anglo-Zulu War, the Battle of Kambula, which happened on March 29, 1879. This was a huge turning point because the Zulu warriors, who had been really strong up until then, suffered a big defeat. After this, they lost confidence, and a few months later, the war ended with the British winning. Let's go back a little. The day before Kambula, on March 28, the British had a rough time at the Battle of Ulundi. Their cavalry, led by Colonel Evelyn Wood, was beaten badly by the Zulu warriors. But instead of giving up, the British prepared for an even bigger battle, knowing the Zulus were coming straight for them. Early on the morning of March 29, British scouts went out to find the enemy. Back at the British camp in Kambula, soldiers were doing their usual chores. Some were taking cattle out to graze, and others were gathering firewood. But by 11 a.m., the scouts rushed back with urgent news. The Zulu army was coming and would attack at noon. The British were facing a massive force, about 21,000 Zulu warriors. Many of them had already fought and won against the British, like in the famous Battle of Isandlwana. Some even had rifles they had taken from fallen British soldiers. But they had a big problem. They hadn't eaten in 3 days. Even though they were brave and determined, hunger and exhaustion made things tougher. Back at the camp, Colonel Wood saw the Zulu warriors coming from 5 miles away. At first, he thought they might be heading somewhere else, but soon it was clear. They were attacking Kambula. Wood was so confident in his defenses that he told his men to sit down and eat their lunch. That's how prepared they were. The British camp was well protected. They had arranged their wagons in a tight hexagon to form a defensive wall. There was also a separate area for their cattle, trenches, and a small stone fort on a hill. They had 6 artillery guns ready to fire at different parts of the battlefield. Inside the camp, Wood had about 2,000 men, including infantry, cavalry, engineers, and artillery. Some were sick or injured, but they still had a strong defense. At 12:45 p.m., the British got ready. They took down their tents, passed out extra ammunition, and took their positions. As they watched, they saw the Zulu warriors getting into formation. The right side of the Zulu army moved out of artillery range and waited to attack, while the left and center got into position to strike from the south. At 1:30 p.m., Wood sent Lieutenant Colonel Redvers Henry Buller and his cavalry to mess with the right wing of the Zulu army. The cavalry rode out, fired a few shots, and quickly retreated. The trick worked. About 11,000 Zulu warriors chased after them, yelling, "Don't run away, Johnny, we want to talk to you." As soon as the British cavalry made it back to camp, the real battle began. British infantry opened fire, and their artillery blasted the charging Zulu warriors. Some Zulus broke through and entered the camp, but they were quickly pushed back with bayonets. Meanwhile, other Zulu warriors tried to attack from the western side, but they were met with heavy British gunfire. At around 3 p.m., the left and center of the Zulu army launched a big attack from a ravine near the British fort. The first wave of warriors was gunned down by British soldiers and artillery. But some Zulus hid in the ravine and started shooting back using rifles they had taken from the British. Things got wild. Zulu riflemen hid in huts and behind a trash pile, firing at the British. The British soldiers guarding the cattle area were overwhelmed and had to retreat, leaving the Zulus to take over in fierce hand-to-hand combat. Colonel Wood knew he had to act fast. He ordered 2 companies of the 90th Light Infantry to charge in with bayonets and take back the cattle area. Led by Major Hackett, the British charged, pushing the Zulus back over the ravine's edge. Once they reached the top, they fired on the retreating Zulu warriors. The counterattack worked, but it wasn't without losses. Major Hackett was badly wounded, and many of his men were killed or hurt. Meanwhile, the right wing of the Zulu army charged from the northeast, heading straight for the British artillery. But the British gunners held their ground, firing explosive shells and shrapnel that tore through the advancing warriors. The huts where Zulu riflemen were hiding were also bombarded, stopping them from firing back. The battle continued with wave after wave of Zulu attacks. The Amatsiu regiment gathered in the ravine and tried to launch another assault. A group of British soldiers moved forward to stop them, but the Zulus fought back hard, forcing the British to retreat. Encouraged, more Zulu warriors rushed in, but they ran straight into heavy British artillery fire. The area in front of the camp turned into a battlefield covered with fallen warriors. Despite their bravery, the Zulus couldn't break through the British defenses. By 5:30 p.m., after hours of intense fighting, the Zulu army had suffered huge losses. Thousands of warriors had fallen, and they had no hope of victory. As the Zulu warriors retreated eastward, Colonel Wood wasted no time. He ordered Colonel Buller to lead 600 cavalry troops to chase them down. The Zulu warriors, already exhausted, kept moving at a steady jog while the British soldiers split into 3 groups and attacked from different sides. The soldiers fired from horseback, swung their rifles like clubs, and even used captured Zulu spears. The chase was relentless. Among those fleeing were the Aba-Dulusi warriors, who had just arrived to help the Zulu army. They had no chance of escape. Captain Cecil Darcy, leading the frontier light horse, gave his men clear orders: take no prisoners. Still furious over their heavy losses at Lobane the day before, his troops wanted revenge. They singled out the Aba-Dulusi, chasing them all the way back to Lobane and cutting them down without mercy. Darcy later described the scene as a massacre, with British troops cutting down the fleeing warriors. Buller, leading the charge, was ruthless. Behind them, British infantry and African allies searched the battlefield, finishing off wounded Zulu warriors and those trying to hide. The slaughter only stopped when night fell and a thick mist rolled over the Zungwin Mountains, forcing the British to halt their pursuit. The Battle of Kambula changed the course of the war. In just 4 hours, the British fired 138,000 bullets and over 1,000 artillery shells. It was now clear that no matter how fearless they were, the Zulu warriors could not stand against well-trained soldiers with rifles and cannons. The loss was devastating. The once organized Zulu regiments were scattered. Their leader, Manyamana, tried to bring them back to Ulundi, but many had lost faith and simply went home. Some continued to raid farms, stealing cattle and livestock, but the main Zulu fighting force had been destroyed. Even among the British, some respected the Zulus' bravery. Commandant Schermbrucker later wrote that, even though they were badly outgunned, they had fought to protect their homeland with incredible courage. In an unusual gesture of respect, the British buried many fallen Zulu warriors with military honors. But despite this, the truth was undeniable. The Zulu army would never fully recover from this defeat. After Kambula, the British pushed forward. Just 4 days later, another 11,000 Zulu warriors were defeated at the Battle of Gingindlavu, ending the siege of Ashoe. The final blow came at Ulundi, where the Zulu made one last desperate attack, only to be crushed by British firepower. This marked the end of their ability to fight major battles. The losses at Kambula were staggering. 2 days after the battle, British burial teams counted 785 Zulu bodies near the camp, but the real number was likely much higher. Many bodies had been carried away by fellow warriors before being abandoned during the retreat. Historian Ian Knight later estimated that as many as 2,000 Zulu warriors were killed, while earlier reports put the number closer to 1,000. Some were caught and killed by British cavalry, while others died from their wounds before they could reach safety. Along the retreat path, another 157 bodies were found, with reports of even more further away. Official British reports estimated that nearly 2,000 Zulu warriors had been killed or wounded. Many Zulu survivors believed their losses were even worse than at Isandlwana. On the British side, 18 soldiers were killed, and 57 were wounded, 11 of whom later died. A massive grave, 200 feet long and 10 feet deep, was dug to bury the Zulu dead. The British had taken some losses, but compared to the devastation suffered by the Zulu, their casualties were minimal. After Kambula, the war had changed forever. The British, learning from their early defeats, adjusted their tactics. Meanwhile, the Zulu had fought with everything they had left, only to be overpowered by superior weapons. The war continued for a little while longer, but the outcome was no longer in doubt.